This next fly will be the woolly bugger. This is one of the most common flies around, one of the most well known. It's a very simple fly, sort of an offshoot of the old woolly worm. We're going to tie this fly on a Timco 5263. That's a 3X long, 2 extra heavy nymph hook. Longer shank than usual so we can get a nice long body out of it. This fly can imitate a minnow or a leech or a stonefly nymph, lots of different stuff. Doesn't look a whole lot like any one thing, looks a little like a lot of things. We're going to start by weighting the fly with some lead wire. That, of course, is optional. We're going to make the tail out of black marabou. We're going to use some copper wire for our rib. In this case, we're going to use some dark olive colored chenille for the body, although you can change that up to whatever color you like. And we're going to use a black saddle feather, a rooster saddle feather, for the hackle. Now, in the case of a woolly bugger, we want a soft, non-genetic rooster saddle, so we've got some webby feathers. And by web, you can see when I bend this feather how those fibers stick together. These are softer feathers. They're going to move more in the water. They're more akin to the hen feathers that we've used earlier. This is going to have a little more movement and sink a little bit better than it would if we tied this fly with a dry fly feather. So with that, we're going to get started. We're going to take just a short segment of lead wire here, and I'm going to wrap the front half of the hook. So from about the midpoint forward, with 12 or 15 turns of lead. I want to stop well short of the hook eye, and I can break that lead off. So we've got some lead wraps there on the front end. The reason I put the lead wraps on the front end of the hook is so the fly will jig a little more and go head down in between strips in the water. I'm going to start my thread just behind the hook eye, about an eye length or two behind the hook eye. I'm going to wrap up to the base of the lead, then I'll jump back over my tag end and cross over the lead and bind down again at the back end. I'm going to make a little band at either end, and this is not necessarily too much of a thread dam here, but I'm going to try to anchor that lead down so it won't slide forward or back. I'm going to run my thread back one more time all the way to the bend, keeping a nice even thread base as I go. I'm going to take my 2 marabou feathers, and I've got 2 here. I like to make a nice bushy tail on these flies. You can see I've preened the bottom of the feathers off, so I've got 2 feathers that are relatively square tipped. Grab them separately here. Square across the ends. I don't like a real ragged tail on these flies. I like them to be nice and even where they'll end. And I'll take the first feather and I'll measure it to about a shank length long. And you can see how I'll grab the base of the feather and just slide my fingers up till it's in a bundle. I can kind of group that up in a nice bunch and measure that against the hook. I want about a shank length long for that tail. And I'll set that in at the bend and tie it down with a few turns of thread. And I'll take my second feather and I'm going to stack it right on top of the first to the same length and pinch it in place and tie it down the same way. Now you can see the amount of bulk that I've got from tying that marabou down. If I was just to cut these feathers off, I'm going to have a big bulge at the back of the fly and then a different shaped body as I move forward. So to eliminate that, I'm going to lift up the butt ends of this marabou and run my thread forward to just the front edge of those lead turns. And I'll lay that marabou down again and tie it down with a couple more turns. Now I can trim the front ends of the marabou off, and I can spiral wrap my thread back over that marabou, and you can see how that evens out the underbody. So we've got a nice even diameter underbody for the fly. That's going to keep it from having lumps and bumps as we go through and tie the rest of the bug. Now I'm going to take a piece of copper wire, and this is small or brassy size. Either one will work. And the color of this really doesn't make a difference. It's hardly going to show on the finished fly. It's merely for reinforcement. I'm going to tie this in at the bend of the hook and wrap back and forth over the tag to anchor it in place. Now I'm going to take a length of this olive chenille, and one of the tricks to tying this in, you can see we've got a lot of volume on the hook shank already. Rather than tie this in at the front and wrap over it, creating even more bulk on the hook, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to strip some of the fibers out of the end, and this kind of works like a hackle feather. I strip some of the fibers off the end, just exposing that cotton core in the center. I'll move my thread back here to the bend and just tie the chenille down by that cotton core. That gives me very little bulk on the hook shank, but I've got the chenille anchored in place where I need it to be. I'm going to run my thread forward to just behind the eye again, and now I'll wrap my chenille forward just making a nice juicy body as it comes toward the eye of the hook. Just one turn in front of the other, no overlap. Chenille is a really easy material to work with. It's very durable, comes in a multitude of colors. I'll tie that off with a few turns, trim that center stem out, and then I want to make a thread base in that front index point area so that I'm not tying our hackle feather to bare metal. Now I'm going to take my saddle feather here, and you can see as I get down toward the very base of the feather, the fibers are very long and really fluffy. I want to get up out of that a little bit, but not too far. So I'll break that feather off there. I'm going to strip just a little bit of the stem at the very base, and then on the inside, I'm going to wrap this feather ultimately this way around the hook. So on the inside of this turn, I'm going to strip just a little bit more on one side, and that's going to keep those fibers from getting bound down as I palmer this feather from the front to the back. With these webby fibers, you've got to be a little more conscious of that, or you'll end up with sort of a ratty looking collar. I'll tie this feather in with the inside of the feather toward the hook, right behind the hook eye. Make the first turn just at the back edge of the thread head. And you can see the web that I was talking about earlier as I start to wrap this. You can see how these fibers all stick together. I'm not going to worry about that till I get done with the fly. I'm going to make 2 or 3 tightly spaced wraps at the front of the fly, and then I'll start to spiral wrap the feather in wide open turns back toward the bin. I'm going to pick up my wire and trap the tip of the hackle feather with it. Now at this point, because we've got this webby feather, I'm going to take my dubbing brush and just run it through those hackles, and you can see how it'll separate those fibers. That's going to make this next move a little bit easier to keep from binding these down. As I wrap forward, I'm just going to kind of zigzag the wire a little bit and just wide open spiral so I don't trap too many of those hackle fibers. When I get to the front, I'll sweep the collar back and jump the wire to the front and catch it with a few turns of thread as well. Then I can helicopter that wire to break it off and come in and trim out the tip of my hackle feather. And build a nice smooth thread head to cover the base of that hackle feather where we tied it in and the wire tie off. Little whip finish at the front. Trim up your thread, and there's the ubiquitous woolly bugger.